Quite often when I'm describing to people the mechanical fuel gauge in a light aircraft, I'll tell them it works on a very similar principle to the components in a toilet system. Most people have never seen inside a toilet system, so let's take a look. Take off the lid. And here is the float valve. So the float is floating on top of the water. When I flush the toilet, which I'll do in a short while, the flow will drop and water will begin to flow. So as I flush the toilet, the flow drops and water will continue to flow until that rests on the water. So in our aircraft, if I had a float which floated on top of the fuel, I could measure the angle of this arm here. So that arm could be linked to a gauge in the cockpit which will say, here you are, fuel is full, fuel is empty, fuel is half full. And that's simply how a mechanical fuel gauge in a light aircraft works. Next, we need to have a look at how we've been able to modify this by, instead of having a mechanical linkage from this arm to the gauge in the cockpit, we've actually got a resistance, a variable resistance, so we can measure electric current. And the purpose of that is that we can measure the position of this float over an average period of time. So when we enter a bank to the left or the right, we're not seeing a change on the gauge in the cockpit. I'm taking an average of this position over, say, 10 minutes. See, here we have the electronic version of it. Quite simply, this part will go inside the fuel tank. No fuel, full fuel. No fuel, full fuel. And we can have a variable resistor, as we have in here, so we can measure the current flowing through the circuit. So if I just remove this now, what we've got is a variable resistance here and the main connection there. So I'm now going to hook this up to a multimeter and we'll just see exactly how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate the connection, the main connection here, being in contact with this part, and that would be the float valve at the top, and that's going to give me full fuel. And as that starts to drop, this would come down, the valve would follow the fuel flowing out of the tank, showing me a decreasing fuel value. Now again, if I hook that up to a box of electronics, I can average that out to take an average of that reading over a period of 10 minutes, and now I've balanced out those horrible little errors that are going to show up on the fuel gauge as the aircraft banks to the left or the right.